Bites, where we carve out space for meaningful conversations that go beyond the grill. I'm Kara Smith, your host and fellow enthusiast of all things tasteful and fulfilling. Today, we're going to gear up for Father's Day in a summer filled with steak with none other than Jocko Willink. Jocko is a retired Navy SEAL, leadership instructor, podcaster, author, entrepreneur, jiu-jitsu black belt, husband, and father of four. Our conversation is going to revolve around raising warrior kids, sharing insights into fueling their bodies and minds to become the best versions of themselves. Jocko, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So, Jocko, I'd like to just dive into the warrior kid concept. So, is that something that, actually, I'd love to hear your inspiration of, where the warrior kid concept, the books, the upcoming movie, all of those types of things. Where did that come from for you?
So I have 4 kids of my own. They're all older now, but when I was raising my young kids, I really was looking around for books to read to them or books for them to read themselves that I thought would transmit and encourage the type of values and ethics that I would want my children to have. And those books didn't really seem to exist at the time. Um, I remember that the book that broke the camel's back for me there was a book, and I forget the name of the book, but it was something about pirates. It was some kind of pirates. And I thought, this would be a good book for my son, read about pirates. And these were the weakest, wimpiest, most pathetic pirates I'd ever seen in my life. And so, with that, and then with the other books that I would see, and just watching my kids grow up and watching them, the challenges that you face as a kid and that all kids face, I just thought it'd be good if I could take some of the lessons that I had learned, really a lot of the lessons that I learned in the SEAL teams, and pass them on to the kids in a way that would be entertaining and a way that they could process these lessons and put them into their own lives. So I started writing the first book, The Way of the Warrior Kid.
Awesome. So what have you learned since then? How has that morphed? What has it become? And what tips can you share with parents that are on this path of being able to try to raise warrior kids?
Yeah, I think there's a whole slew of things there that I learned raising my own kids. And I have a podcast, and I when I started my podcast, it was 2015, and people would ask me questions about parenting, and I was a little reluctant to answer because, and I would say, the jury's not really out yet. My kids were still pretty young, and you don't know how they're going to end up. And so I didn't really give a ton of advice. Rather, I did give some advice around some things that I knew I had done wrong, but I didn't really lock in and say, this is what I think. So as I raised my kids, I mean, you definitely learn lessons. And the biggest lesson that I learned is that kids, at parenting and having kids is just a leadership exercise. It really is a leadership exercise. And the same rules that apply to leading troops in combat or leading a business or leading a team, they apply to your kids as well. And if you keep that in mind, you're going to do fine. What makes it tricky is that we're super emotional about our kids because they're our kids and we care about them a lot. And we over index on certain things that we probably shouldn't. And we try and, in many cases, I see parents trying to force their kids to follow a path. And when you force your kids to do something, just like any other human being, just like an employee, just like a team member, when you impose something on them and force it down their throat, generally speaking, they're not going to like it, or there's a high probability that they're not going to like it. So I think that's one of the most important lessons that I learned from raising my kids was your kids are going to be not who you want them to be. Your kids are going to be who they are. And the more you try and get them to become who you want them to be, there's a greater likelihood that they actually not just reject what you want them to be, but they might even reject you for trying to make them become something that they don't want to be. So I know that's not what a lot of parents want to hear. A lot of parents want to hear, oh, how do I mold my child to be this robot that I created? that follows in my exact footsteps or follows the path that I lay out for them. And it again, does that work 1 in a million? Sure. 1 in a million kids that actually have a similar personality to their mom or their dad, and they get interested in the same things and they go down that path by imposing the path on them. Does it work occasionally? Yes, but more often than not, it causes kids to rebel and reject. And so I think you've got to be very careful of that, and just try and give your kids some space and some room to grow and become themselves. And I think that's the best way to go about it. And look, I'm not talking about some extreme thing where you just let your kids do whatever you want. And certainly the other end of the spectrum is you're dictating every single move that your kids make. There's a happy medium that you got to find. And by the way, another challenge here, it'll be different with each one of your kids. Each one of your kids will respond differently to how you interact with them. And just like your different employees respond differently, just like your different team members respond differently, and your kids are going to have different reactions to your interactions with them. So you have to use caution, and you have to be aware, and you have to pay attention, and you have to adjust and calibrate and modulate your own behavior as a parent in order to guide them in the right direction.
Absolutely. That's solid advice. We have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and we both roll jujitsu. I'm still a lowly white belt. Jeff now's got his blue belt. And that's something that we both feel very passionate about of instilling in our children. And Jeff makes the joke all the time. He's like, our 4-year-old, she's probably going to be very technical and fluid and, have all of the techniques down. And our 2-year-old is just going to Hulk smash. I mean, that is just kind of the way she's wired. But I guess we've recognized that at a young age. So that's helpful to know that they both are wired very differently. And they are going to need to be parented differently, which
Yep.
I suppose is good. As you were saying all of those incredibly great insights, another thing that came to mind for me was, out on the ranch, like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So just thinking about that from a parenting mindset, I think is great for us to keep in mind. I would love to hear like what, when you think of a warrior or warrior kid, what in particular, what do you say is like maybe the values or things that you'd like them to have forefront? Not necessarily us from a parenting perspective, but them personally.
Yeah, I mean, it's all the things you would want for a good human being, right? You want them to be hard workers. You want them to be take responsibility for their actions, and simple things like you want them to be clean, right? You don't want them to be dirty. You want them to, of course, in the warrior kid vernacular, that means keeping your gear ready, right? So those basic principles, being disciplined, of course, treating other people with respect, of course, working hard and doing the best that you can, always training to be in the best physical and mental shape that you can be in, so study hard. These are all basic things that we all know will make a kid's life better. If a kid studies hard, their life is going to be better. If a kid works hard, their life is going to be better. If a kid eats clean food and good food, their life is going to be better. If they exercise, their life is going to be better. If they participate in sports, their life is going to be better. If they clean up after themselves, their life is going to be better. If they learn how to earn money, their life is going to be better. We know all these things. We know all these things. And so, yeah, those are the basic principles that I tried to put together. And the Warrior Kid Code is, a very powerful tool that I put in there. But part of what I put in the Warrior Kid Code is the Warrior Kid Code isn't dictated to the Warrior Kid. It's actually what he creates himself. And that was one of the ideas behind the book itself, was making sure that he was going to be able to create his own Warrior Kid code. He wasn't going to be, have it dictated to him. He was going to create it himself. And that was one of the key components of it, and it's really like basic things. Again, when you get into that Warrior Kid code itself, it's like the Warrior Kid code. The Warrior Kid wakes up early in the morning. The Warrior Kid, strives to learn and gain knowledge. That's part of the warrior kid code. The warrior kid trains hard and exercises and eats right to be strong and fast and healthy. The warrior kid treats people with respect, doesn't judge them, and helps other people whenever possible. The the warrior kid keeps things neat and is always prepared for action. The warrior kid stays humble, controls their ego, stays calm, and warrior kids don't lose their tempers. So the final one is the warrior kid works hard, saves money, is frugal, doesn't waste things, and always does their best. So those are the fundamental rules of the warrior kid. That's the warrior kid code. But what I think in the book, what I think is powerful is I get letters all the time from young kids that have created their own warrior kid. And just like in business, just like leading any team, if you impose rules on people, it's not theirs. They don't have ownership of it. They have a tendency to reject it a little bit. But if they create their own rules, they create their own code, it belongs to them and they have ownership, and therefore they're much more apt to follow the code that they created. And that's definitely one of the key components of the book.
Absolutely. And of course, you definitely champion ownership and that the entire thought process within that. That's something that I mean we take very near and dear to our hearts, but also part of the reason that we moved back to Colorado was to come back to the ranch because there was some of those principles that frankly I wasn't quite sure how to teach my children without them having the type of experience that they do here and having an animal that relies on them for literally everything. There's immense ownership in the fact that they need to take care of that animal. And then the honor piece of the sacrifice that that animal will make for them. It's a very different thought process when you're raising an animal for food consumption versus, the animal that you're caretaking as your pet. So there was some of, your principles that you mentioned as far as the book that we can definitely relate to. And frankly, I just didn't know how else to teach besides having those experiences for themselves to help shape their ownership, to help shape themselves in that hard work of these animals need to eat before you do. You need to make sure that those are big pieces of your life. So, I know you fall back to the seals and those principles, and I think that's where we relate back to what you learn when you're out with nature and out with these animals and how we caretake for them and the sacrifice of that. So
Yeah, and that's awesome. And what's awesome about that is you can take these rules and you can apply them to the ranch. But if someone lives in a city, you can apply them to being in the city. And when you live in the city, what you want to do, whether you're in the city or whether you're on the ranch or whether you live in a suburb, what you want to do is you want to give your kids basically as much responsibility as they can handle and maybe a little bit more. I always joke about letting your kids, if kids got to go to school, right? Letting your kids make their own lunch. And a lot of times it's so much easier for us as parents to take that 2 minutes that we can make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in and ship them off to school. It's going to take them 7 minutes to make the sandwich. There's going to take them another 7 minutes to clean it up. It's probably going to be a big mess inside of whatever bag they put the sandwich in. But guess what? The next day, it's going to take them about 6 minutes. And the day after that, it's going to take them about 5 minutes. And the day after that, you're not going to have to worry about it anymore. So, same thing with tying your shoes. When you tie your kids' shoes, look, there's an age, of course, where they can't tie their shoes, but you should let them try just about every time. Because when you don't let them tie their own shoes, you're making them rely on you and not developing self-reliance. Not to mention there's like actual fine motor skills that you develop when you do things like tying your shoes, and you're taking that opportunity to improve away from your kids. So as much as you can, and again, I'm not an extremist of any kind in any category, and I'm not extremist about having your kids take responsibility for themselves, but as much as you can, let your kids be responsible for what they eat, what they wear, what time they go to school, who gets them out of bed, who puts them to bed. Let them be responsible for as much of that as you can, and you're going to have kids that are much more self-reliant than if you do everything for them.
yeah, I love that. Uh, So I take it to be a proponent of the consequences that would come along with that. You know, if a kid decides not to get up and go to school, well, hey, you missed school. There's consequences to your actions. You want to flesh that out a little bit for us, Jocko?
Well, yeah, there's definitely gonna be consequences for the actions. And a funny one is the lunch thing. I remember having the conversation with my wife, well, we can't send them to lunch, can't send them to school without lunch. Why not? Kids aren't going to starve to death in one day. It's not going to happen. They're going to be just fine. And in fact, they'll probably remember to make their lunch the next day. So again, I'm not talking about doing anything extreme here, but when your kid misses school and then they have to stay after school for a detention, well, that's the consequences that happen. So yeah, there's going to be consequences for your actions. I like the consequences to be real, right? For instance, if you don't make your lunch, you don't eat. If you don't train for your jiu-jitsu tournament, you're going to get beat. There's things that if you don't take care of your horse, you're not going to get your ride your horse. Like there's going to be there's a real reason for that. So I like the consequences to be related to the real world. I don't like to arbitrarily punish my kids with an arbitrary punishment that I made up. Hey, did I do that? Of course. There's times where your kids do things that they have to feel some immediate consequences. Sure. But as much as I can, I like the world itself to teach children and teach my kids rather than I have to teach them. I like the world to teach them. Oh, how many times? Well, so I live in Southern California. Southern California is a semi-arid desert. A lot of times people don't remember that. What does that mean? That means it's 80 degrees in the day, and then at nighttime, it gets down to 54 degrees. 54 degrees, if you're wearing a pair of shorts and a t-shirt outside for a long period of time, gets a little chilly. So I would tell my kids all the time, bring it, it doesn't matter. If you're in Southern California, bring a sweatshirt. Coastal Southern California, bring a sweatshirt with you. Bring a hoodie, at least. And many, many times my kids would say, I don't think I'm going to need one. And I'd say, okay, you don't have to bring one. And sure enough, you're going to be cold. They would be cold later. And now, that my kids are all older kids, they all have hoodies with them pretty much all the time. So those are the kind of lessons that I think work best is when the actual world itself provides the enforcement. If you've got chores to do and that's how you earn money in the family and you don't do your chores, well, guess what? I guess you can't come to the movie with us because you can't buy your ticket. Simple as that. So yeah, I like the real world consequences.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's and here a lot of times, the consequences if you don't feed your animals, then they're not going to live. Like you have to be able to do those things, and those are pretty intense consequences, which is part of the real
Yeah,
world as well. But
I think that brings back this is another thing. So when you have something like that, and there's always going to be, obviously you can't let the animals suffer because of the shortfalls of your kids.
exactly, yeah,
So, certainly there's times where, there's when I looked at my house and the way my kids were, well, as a kid in my house, you have a lot of privileges, right? You have a ton of privileges. You've got, you can watch TV, you can, you have food on the table, you get dessert, you have a bed, you have a door to your bedroom, you've got all these things that are they're a luxury. They're a luxury. They're a privilege. And I always found that real world if the real world consequence wasn't there, then privileges would be revoked. So, it's real easy. I can definitely give you a ride to your friend's house. Oh, but you didn't do your chores? Guess who's not getting a ride to their friend's house? I'm not here to drive you around. Oh, you didn't do your chores or you didn't get the grade that you were supposed to get. I guess you don't get to eat dessert. I guess you don't get to go to the movies on the weekends with us. So there are privileges that can be revoked. And I revoked some privileges probably a little bit extreme a few times with my kids, but I think it's important that they recognize that, and that's another thing with parents is for the kids to realize that everything that we are doing as parents is so that we can give our kids a roof over their heads, food on the table, shoes on their feet and a pair of pants and a t-shirt. That's what we're doing. And sometimes they think that that's just the way the world is. And as we, as you and I both know, that's not the way the world is. So I think considering the privileges that you bestow upon your children and taking those privileges away from them is pretty powerful. Another good one's laundry, right? Laundry, my wife, she would do laundry. But if you don't put your clothes in the dirty hamper and you leave them on your floor, they're not getting cleaned. And by the way, now your clothes are no longer accepted into the laundry facility. Now you have to do that all by yourself. And, it's one of those things where you learn to appreciate things and you learn to take responsibility for your part of the task.
Absolutely. We just ended up with a bottle calf, and I had to have the conversation with my 4-year-old. I'm like, wait, I will be happy to bring him home, take care of him if you want to accept that responsibility. We'll do everything. We'll get all of this stuff to make sure he has a wonderful life. But if you want to be able to take him to the county fair and show him for the bucket calf show, this is your responsibility. I definitely would not let this animal suffer. But like, if you want to do this and you want to take ownership of that, then you go out there and you feed that calf every day. And she's been out there every day, making sure that that calf is fed because she wants to be able to have the privilege of taking him to the fair and showing her friends and having her grandparents come and watch her show her bucket calf. So
That's awesome. Good for her. And she's
yes,
4?
she's 4.
Outstanding.
Yes. So, Jocko, I would love to dive into kind of the fueling bodies piece of this. Of course, with the we're a beef company at heart, but the fueling the bodies of children, kind of your thought process around that, and then moving into a few things that we have going for what we're going to call a summer of steak. So can't go wrong with putting steak on the grill during the summer.
Yeah, certainly. I think the whole world has become more and more aware of the importance of what you eat in the last, well, certainly since COVID, that has seemed to really have become a big part of what people think about. Luckily for me, I've, being in the SEAL teams for a long time, and we really were lucky to have some very cutting edge people around the nutrition space. And so I was pretty ahead of the idea of eating clean and what that means. And so I think that's sort of how I ended up, well, obviously in the supplement business and then, partnering with you all because I view steak as a very important part of my fueling system. And also I think it's should be a part of everyone's fueling system. So yeah, I'm a huge proponent of steak.
Well, I couldn't agree more. But of course, I was born and raised on it, and I didn't realize actually how lucky I was until I moved away and didn't have a freezer full of steak. Just out in the shop. That was a big adjustment period for me. Had to call
Well,
my dad and be like, "Hey, I need you to come down to Texas and bring me some homegrown beef." So,
interestingly for me, we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up, and I ate hamburgers. There was a butcher down the street, and my mom would buy frozen burger patties from the butcher in big boxes of 40. She'd have a couple of those in the freezer all the time, and I ate hamburgers all the time. I would have, I always joke that I would have a hamburger on an English muffin for breakfast, a hamburger on pieces of bread for lunch, and a hamburger on a bun for dinner. And that was sort of like the three different meals that I would get. And I never really ate steak until I joined the Navy and I had money that I could buy steak, and I started to slowly acquire a taste for it. But I didn't really have the taste for it when I was growing up, just because it wasn't something we were able to afford to eat, at least on a regular basis. And so it just wasn't that big of a deal for me. But then once I got in the Navy and I had my own paycheck and I could spend my money the way I wanted to. And then on top of that, I started learning more and more about nutrition. Yeah, steak became a huge part of my intake of calories on a daily basis. So it is a little bit. It was an acquired taste for me, and I didn't really start eating it on a regular basis until I was probably 22 or 23.
sure. Well, and you can't go wrong with hamburger. I mean,
Yeah.
I still always default to that, and our kids do, and all of the things. But I would love to hear your thought process on just we talk you talk a lot about American made, etc. And some of the thought process you brought up of knowing where your food comes from. Could you share a little bit on that?
Yeah. Well, clearly on the supplement side, we're hyper aware of and concerned about how we produce our supplements, what ingredients we put in them, where they're manufactured, how they're manufactured. So we're really strict on that. It's very clear on the origin side as well. So Origin USA, we have a clothing company, and that is all manufactured here in America. And on top of being manufactured here in America, all the components to make the boots and the jeans and the hoodies, all of it comes 100% from an American supply chain of American materials. And, for me, growing up in the military and having traveled overseas and seeing the way that other countries treat their workers and treat their environment, it really became a mission of mine once I got out of the military to try and bring manufacturing back to America, try and bring jobs back to America, and try and bring the iconic the iconic image of America being and meaning quality. So, we all know the story from the automotive industry, how the Japanese came in the 70s and made cars that everyone considered higher quality, and it hurt me, as an American kid growing up, and I thought to myself, how is this happening? So that really just became an important part of my life was hey, how can we bring American manufacturing back here? How can we bring this supply chain to America, or at least utilize the American supply chain? When you see what the way that, like I said, overseas, the way they treat workers overseas is really terrible. And on top of that, the way that they treat the environment. So they they don't have the EPA in China. There's no EPA in China. They don't care what happens to the environment. They don't care what happens to the rivers. They don't care what happens to the ocean. They don't care what happens to the atmosphere. And on top of that, they don't care what happens to their workers. And we in America, we don't see that. We don't see what that looks like. What we see is what we used to see was what American manufacturing, they polluted these rivers. Well, we clean that stuff up. The same thing is happening now in overseas where they're polluting rivers, they're polluting oceans. We just don't see it. But it's the same thing that used to happen here. Now we've cleaned it up with the EPA here. Obviously we have the way we treat our workers here in America is it's not even comparable to what happens to workers in second and third world countries. So, yes, that is something that's very, very important to me. And that's one of the reasons I love being partnered with you all, because I know you, I know the team, I know where you operate, I know how you operate, I know where my stakes come from, and that's hugely important to me, and that's something I try and make other people aware of as much as I can.
Absolutely. Well, I love that concept. And also just to tie that together with the kid side of that, that's something that we're very passionate about, is making sure our children know where our food comes from too. Because I think there has been a disconnect through time of just losing that connection back to where your food actually comes from, how it's actually produced, the people with their, hands in the ground doing the work. And being able to bring that back is incredible. Being able to have an amplified voice with you, Jocko, to have those conversations with people of like, hey, it really does matter where your food comes from, and know who produces it, and know how it was produced, know how it was treated, all of the details that come along with that. And I think that's incredible to see that shift that we're making in this country. Being able to almost make being a cowboy cool again too, and some of those pieces of just getting back to the roots of us as Americans. So So, Jocko, to close out, I'd love to chat real quick about, we have a specially curated Jocko box that we're planning to drop here. What it just some thought processes behind that. More or less we're curating steaks and great cuts of beef to put in one box, to be able to get that out to consumers alike, but also we're tying that in with we're giving back to Mama Lee and that organization with the proceeds of that box, and actually all of the revenue for CCB during that time. Love to hear your thoughts around not only the box but the kind of the philanthropy and the giving back piece of that.
Yeah, I know it's an outstanding concept, and I think it's going to have a huge impact. So, America's Mighty Warriors. This is a charity organization that was started by Mark Lee's mom, Mama Lee. Mark Lee was a guy that was with me in Iraq in the Battle of Ramadi. He was just an incredible human being, an incredible person, incredible warrior. He was killed in 2006 in that battle on August 2nd, and just first SEAL killed in Iraq, just was an awesome person. And his mom, Mama Lee, who she became our adopted mom, or we became her adopted sons. Immediately when her son was killed, when Mark was killed, her immediate response was, "Oh, how are you guys doing? Is everything okay with you? What can I do to help you?" And that just showed, and that was literally Leif Babin, who is Mark's direct platoon commander. He was talking to Mama Lee at this, the first call that he made, and her response was, I was sitting right next to him. She said, "How are the guys doing? What can I do to help you guys?" And so here was a woman that had just lost her son, and what she was thinking about was not herself and her own pain, but she was thinking about us and thinking about how she could help us. And that's it was no surprise, knowing Mark and how giving and benevolent he was as a person. So it was no surprise that his mom was the same. And she continued on with that mission with America's Mighty Warriors. And what she does is she tries to help out veterans, Gold Star families, and just people that are either active duty or retired or just having served veterans. She helps them in a multitude of different ways, and everything from somebody might be having a hard time. Maybe they got laid off from their job and they're having a hard time buying groceries. She'll step in and cover down on that, all the way to one of the most impactful things that she does, from my perspective, is getting medical care and medical treatment for veterans, treatment that is not covered by the VA. So one of those types of treatments is a hyperbaric chamber protocol that lasts between 30 and 45 days, and getting extra oxygen in the system. It has a huge impact, especially for traumatic brain injuries. And I've watched friends of mine who have gone through that treatment and have had their lives turned completely around for the better. And she's done that for scores of veterans at this point. So that's what America's Mighty Warriors does, and Mama Lee leads it, and she does just an amazing job with it. It's helped out so many veterans. And so yeah, when Jeff was asking me, "Hey, is there a particular charity that's immediate for me?" Is America's Mighty Warriors, because I know Mama Lee, I know the impact that it has. And then, of course, the easy part is, hey, can we put a box of good meat together to get out to people and have this money donated to America's Mighty Warriors? That's a no brainer. I again, getting people the best steak they can get, that's healthy for them, healthy for their family, tastes absolutely delicious, and you're helping support an incredible charity. It's a no brainer to me, and couldn't be more honored to be a part of it.
Thank you. Well, we're honored to be a small part of that as well. We mean that from the bottom of our hearts. So, as we are going to kick off, summer of steak here, we'll have the specially curated box for Jocko, and to be able to support an incredible cause. So, any
Outstanding.
Any final thoughts, Jocko, as we wrap up?
Just thanks for what you all are doing. Obviously, thanks for helping out with America's Mighty Warriors, but thanks for what you're doing every day. I know it's hard work out there. It's hard work from everything from beginning to end, and that's everything from out in the field all the way to the finances and the packaging, the whole 9 yards. It's hard work running a business like you're running, and you're doing it and you're stepping up every day. As you know, when you're a business owner, I've owned businesses for quite a few years now. You're it. That's where the phone calls come. They come to you, and I know you get phone calls all the time. I know you get emergencies happening, and you don't have anyone on speed dial. You are the speed dial. So just thanks to you and your family and the team for stepping up every day to really bring forth a high quality American product that helps people out by not only bringing them together as a family, having a barbecue, but getting them healthy, eating the right food. It's just outstanding across the board. And I couldn't be more happy, more proud to be a part of it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jocko. So today, as we wrap up, I'm just going to leave everybody with a little bit of food for thought. Remember that each moment is an opportunity for growth and impact. So stay inspired, stay empowered, and continue to fuel your legacy. Till then, I'm Kara Smith signing off with Steak Bites Podcast.